part of this integration, by bringing units to the community, making available units to the community, it also integrates the housing for people that are living there with disabilities. And that's really what the supportive housing model has been all about, trying to expand people's independence, expand their choice for individuals with disabilities, get people out of institutions into the community. These objectives have risen in importance with the increased focus on integration mandates that the Olmstead decision has pushed, and the state recently created an Olmstead plan. So Deputy Secretary Burke, could you tell us a little bit about what the state has been doing in this area and how supportive housing fits into that?
Sure. Well, I think there's been a tremendous commitment on the part of this governor towards integration, towards people having a choice of where they receive their services. Obviously, the implementation plan, Olmstead implementation plan, is a key part of making sure that that does happen and holding the state accountable to those goals. But I think we also recognize that integration in choice isn't necessarily about a certain percentage. It's really about a way of life. And what we need to do now is convince the federal government that as we are making these changes going forward, and they're putting more mandates on things like integration and exactly what it means, probably the most recent example of that being the release of the home and community-based regulations, where states have to show that they comply. We want to show them a plan going forward as to how we will get there over time. And we want to stay true to those goals. I think we are committed to integration, we're committed to choice, but we have a vast system that needs to change, and supportive housing can be a key part of helping us make that change.
Deputy Secretary Chafee, New York City's facing record homelessness. Other localities are also experiencing increases. The state, a lot of people don't realize how much the state regulates the responses that localities have towards homelessness and the actions that they take. How is the Cuomo administration assisting localities to address the crisis?
So, as part of the administration, I'm going to speak most clearly about New York City. We are, as Fran said earlier, we are working very, very closely with New York City to really analyze all the different appropriate roles that the state may take. And there are different levers of government. We have program changes that are possible. We have regulation reform that's possible. We have short-term, i.e. during the current year. We have next year's fiscal year, and we have long-term. I want to recognize the strong leadership of the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance and Kristen Proud in really thinking about every different way that the state can and will swiftly work with New York City to address the crisis. We are deeply committed, and I should end this by saying that we do not have an exciting announcement about rental subsidies. We are extremely aware that this is one of the critical tools, and we're carefully analyzing different structures, but we're not yet ready to speak publicly.
I would like to ask a couple things specific to, we heard about from Deputy Mayor Glenn the importance of moving people on from supportive housing, and I'm wondering if there are things that the state is looking at to enable people who are stable living in supportive housing to move on so that we clear up additional units in supportive housing for people who may need that level of intensive services more than the people that were stable. Are there things that we can see from the healthcare system, from the social services system, rental supports, that the state could partner with both the city and other communities to make happen? And I'll throw that out to anybody that cares to answer.
Well, I think I'll start. I think we have a tremendous foundation that's already been built with the health homes, and I think connecting better supportive housing with those health homes can get us to that point where people can progress and move on and become even more independent, creating that continuum of services. So I think that's one place to start.
We have ongoing discussions with the city looking at rental assistance, and this is a tough issue because of the fiscal restraints that we're facing, but we are talking about it. You know, as Louisa mentioned earlier, we made progress already this year with the HIV rent cap program. So we certainly understand the issue, and this is one of the things that we talk about with the city on a regular basis to try to address. And we are open to it. You know, that there have been mistakes made in the past as to how we provide rental assistance, which obviously would help get people out of supportive housing if they're ready into you know, regular housing or scatter site housing where they may not need quite so intense support but still need some degree of support. All of these are answers. They're all part of the pipeline of moving people through and getting them the kind of help they need at whatever point in their development they are. But you know, these are difficult issues to address given again the fiscal realities. We need to be as creative as possible, and maybe this is a good time for me to mention something that we actually talked to the coalition about the other day. We had a plan as part of the budget that we passed this year to use social impact bonds to fund operating and supportive services. And I believe, Louisa, was it $30 million? Yeah, we couldn't get it passed. It was rejected by the legislature, and which was extremely disappointing. And I think Alicia had to leave, but as Ted pointed out, Alicia's been a leader in this area. We think that there is ample evidence that the supportive housing model saves money, and what a great return on investment. There is, in the world in which we live, some ideological opposition to the idea of any kind of private investment and in the delivery of these kinds of services, which actually is kind of absurd when you think about how the creative funding mechanisms we now have. A lot of people here come from the world of finance, and they've been our great partners in the supportive housing world. We already have private dollars that are playing a major role in the development of supportive housing. The idea that that a social impact bond, which, by the way, was going to be supported both by the not-for-profit and the for-profit sector, this was not a purely private sector initiative, that people would have an ideological problem with it because they believe that these are services that it is government's responsibility to deliver, and we should never turn to the private sector for something that is basic to government. I would have liked to have thought that we had gotten beyond that kind of thinking in New York, but we haven't. And there are still a lot of people who hold on to that. And I would say to all of you that in the course of your lobbying efforts for the whole panoply of issues that we've talked about today and that you're going to talk about through the rest of this conference, put that on your radar screen, because $30 million would have supported a whole nother bunch of people in need. And the thought that this was killed because of people who are mired in some, quite frankly, antiquated ideology is galling. So, you know, we're trying to be creative, you're trying to be creative, private sector's trying to be creative, but there are still people in the political world who are not being terribly creative. So we need your help with that.
And you'll get it. I mean, we've got to try harder. We've got another chance next year, and I think that we can try. I think the more that we can try to figure out the practical challenges around administering social impact bonds, and I think a lot of the financiers in the room here, tax credit syndicators, know better than anybody how to leverage private dollars for a pay-for-success model. If we can somehow join those efforts together, I think we might be able to get on to something.